Hi, Sunday morning. I'm trying an experiment again to do this at the urging of my teen. I'm trying to do this on a video at the same time as I do the audio. Uh, we'll see how it works. I'm just not good at this, but my son came here to set it up for me. So here we go. This week, the also three of the podcasts are being sponsored by a good friend with a podcast, which is Abe Gluck, the Gluck Plumbing in Lakewood. He's sponsoring three this week in honor of the memory of his parents, which is a very fine, very classy thing to do. That's Chaim Eliezer Shalom, Reb Tobi Gedalia, that's the father, and Chava Fega Bas Shmaya Shlita Glick. So I asked him, if he scratched out, his parents are from America, but his grandparents are from Hungary, from Klein Verdun. So I actually have somebody in my show, her grandfather, I think, or whatever, was a Klein Verdun Reb. This is Kisvárda in Hungary. These are the small communities in eastern Hungary, which until the Holocaust were overwhelmingly Orthodox. It's just interesting. Kisvárda, Kisvárda is a small castle, Klein Verdun, like in German. And this is, the once upon a time was the good old days until Hitler. And then all of a sudden it wasn't the good old days. And all the friends that they thought the Hungarians around them were friendly turned out not to be that way, as I think we're all aware. So it's in tribute to their memory, which is with the yahrzeit this week. And Neshama Shalom Aliyah, and we thank the Gluck Plumbing for this. So that means this week is going to be, he's sponsoring the biography, the Parsha, and the Haftorah. So Neshama Shalom Aliyah. Especially in the beginning of Elul. So anything that's Marbitz is good. Now, I'll tell you the truth. Last week I was in Teaneck, and I ran there of a while, and he said we had an interesting conversation, and one of the things he's interested in Maharil, and which I'll eventually do. I told him about Shaus and Shuvas and things like that in general, and for some reason I turned my mind to the Trumas Hadeshim, because he's more or less a contemporary of the Maharil, who I always was kind of hesitant to do, but I don't know, I just had the bug to do it today, and so I'm going to devote today's talk to one of the most interesting figures in Jewish history you never heard about. Meaning, it's a rare case. I just find the Trumas Hadeshim fascinating. It's a rare case of a rabbi from old. Do we actually know some things about this personal side of his life to some degree? So let's get down to it. We're talking about somebody who was a big rabbi in the 15th century, like 1390, 1460. Even the dates are nice. And here we're talking about Austria. Well, it's kind of strange. I don't know how to run this on the video as well. Otherwise, I would show a map. But I just don't know how to do it. It used to be we're talking about the late 13th and basically the 1400s. I know that doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but hopefully after my talks, some of it will. And talked about before with Marie Weil, Ashkenaz Jews used to be called the Holy Roman Empire. Germany was a lot bigger than Germany is today. The southern part of Germany extended into what we call today Austria, and even beyond that, into the area below Austria, which when I was a kid used to be called Yugoslavia. It used to be called part of the Austrian Empire. It's Slovenia. I think Donald Trump's wife was from there. And it's a strange area of Europe, what can I tell you? And there were strong Jewish communities there once upon a time. These would be Ashkenazi Jews that are always moving away to the periphery, try to find business. And especially in the late 1400s, very big anti-Semitism, more than usual. In the middle of the 1300s was that Black Death, the Great Plague, which killed a lot of Jews and killed the Velta Goyim. The Jews were blamed for it, caused a lot of anti-Semitism. But besides that, there was just a very strong period of the Roman Catholic anti-Semitism and things like that. And so it was a tough time to be Jewish. And basically, you never knew what tomorrow could bring. Over and over again, you had a situation where you had a prosperous Jewish community, everything's going good, and then boom, some pogrom or some other junk broke out, and everybody got killed or kicked out or something like that. Therefore, if you're Jewish and you're living at that time, you're naturally neurotic. Get it? Is it normal to be neurotic? It's abnormal not to be neurotic, because life is like that. That's the world in which our hero lived. Yisrael Isserlein. Isserlein is, let me put it this way. When I was younger in yeshiva, we used to run across this guy when you went to go for your Yeridea, because he's Maharai. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Did you ever study after you get on do Basar B'chol, Taruvas, and all that business? They always look at Maharai. Who is this person? And to Marina Rav Isserlein. That's who we're talking about today. Yisrael Isserlein ben Pesachia. Isserlein is nothing but old German for Isser. But line is like, have you heard Fräulein? You see it? A Frau is a German woman. Fräulein is a diminutive in a nice way. So in Eastern Europe, they corrupted it just, like Moshala. So in Germany, our ancestors long ago, when they said Moshala, it was a Moshalein, right? A Rachelein. It just means like nice. So his wife was Shendel, right? Shendel. But her name was Schendlein. These are nice ways that people used to talk once upon a time. But because he became such a big gadol, it was very famous, Reb Isserlein, right? So it's actually a little bit funny because it's a diminutive of a gadolador, but actually that's a nice thing. You understand? It's like saying Reb Chatzkel. Why don't you call the guy by his real name? No, it's endearment. You understand? The public liked him. They call him by endearment. Now, in our case, I forget exactly how the biographers put it, but I know they've discovered a lot of this person. That's not going to be of interest to you guys. Used to say he's born here, but then later the research found he's born there. That doesn't mean anything to you. But the thing to have in mind is to think about the Jewish communities in southern Germany and Austria, near Vienna and south of Vienna. Our hero is going to spend most of his life in a place called Wiener Neustadt, which is New Vienna, which is about 35, 40 miles south of Vienna. And in addition to that, there's another place called Marburg, which is about 100 miles, 150 miles south of that place, of Wiener Neustadt. This don't mean anything to you if I were to tell you this is today called Maribor. And if you go there, somebody last year sent me a email. He said, I lead tours, Beis Yaakov tours, went to Maribor. You can see the old shul. It's true. A lot of these places in that part of Europe, the Jews are dead, but the communities that preserve the synagogues and stuff like that. By the way, same thing in Kishvar. The Jews are dead, but the synagogue is preserved as because it's the nicest building in town. This is a world of the Jews and the Germans and the Slavs. Get it? This is where the Germanic conquest stuck its nose into Slavic areas. And that's why these Slavic areas, Croatia, Slovenia, what's the other one called? Slovenia, Carinthia, Styria. I mean, these names don't mean anything to you unless you live in that particular little wrinkle of Europe. But once upon a time, there were Jewish communities there. And in the period we're talking about, which is the 1400s, 1300s, there were Chashuva communities. And there were big Mekomos at Torah, mainly because they had big Rabbanim over there. So Jewish history is replete with little fly trap, no place, good for nothing, junk little towns, which became famous in Jewish history because some rabbi came there and made a big community or a yeshiva or something like that. After all, just off the top of my head, what the heck is Lubavitch? Some verkackte little nothing in White Russia. You know what I mean? The town itself. I saw they once did an interview with the mayor today. The guy wasn't wearing clothes. He just had like shorts or something like that. It's poverty beyond belief. The Lubavitch Rebbe made it Lubavitch. The Ger Rebbe made Ger something. You understand? Volozhin is a garnished. I was there. Is garnished. Volozhin became famous in Jewish because of Volozhin Yeshiva. So similarly, if we're talking about the career of our hero, Yisrael Isserlein ben Pesachia, he made the place where he lived a chashuv. And themselves are themselves not so chashuv. Okay, now, here's somebody, as I said before, 1390, 1460. So he lived all through the 1400s. Austria was a wild and crazy place. Then you have the Habsburg, the dukes, before they became the emperors. And they're all about money and greed. And when he was 30 years old, so let's put it this way. As you might imagine, we're dealing with someone from a chashuv rabbinic family. I think his grandfather was at Goz Hasheri, something like that, if that means anything to you. So, you know, that type, from the elite. Over and over again, we come across these famous rabbis who are from the elites, families. Because a regular shoemaker, 9 out of 10 times, not going to become a gadol because it's not in the cards. You don't have the time and the family tradition of scholarship. It's possible. You know, it happens once in a while, but not really. Usually, they're members of the elite families who had long traditions of scholarship, the men and the women. You married the type of woman who works to raise the children like that. You know, there's enough money in there somehow or other. You're already a member of the fraternity by just being a member of this family. The other rabbis relate to you in this way. Like it or not, it was an elitist world. Okay? What can I tell you? And our hero is mamish from that chevra. And so if you want to know what an elitist world would mean, and by the time you hit the year 1400, it's people who traced themselves back to Rottenberg the Rush and their students. These were the big names at that time. You understand? The Mordechai, you know, the specialists in these histories, which I'm not going to do with you now. I mean, I could, but believe me, I'm not exaggerating when I say the Trumas edition is worthy of 6 hours. That's not an exaggeration at all. So I'm going to have to confine my remarks very rigidly to do this within a normal time framework. Although I'm a big fan of his, and I've always found it endlessly fascinating. So, you know, he learned with this uncle and that uncle, you know, that kind of thing. He was a gadol. When he's in his 20, so by 1410, he's 20 years old. During that decade, the Jews have it good. He's learning up a storm. And then comes 1421 and 1422 when a Holocaust hits. It's called the Vienna Gzera, which, without going into the details, most of the Jews of Vienna rounded up, burned alive. The women were kidnapped, killed, tortured. A lot of Jews committed mass suicide. Hell of a business. The story is, I'll do sometime in another podcast about it. That's a whole parsha by itself. Why the Duke did that. He was angry at his wife. Suffice it to say, it was a Holocaust. But what did our ancestors do when faced with a Holocaust back in the 15th century? They were not rare. Now, it wasn't 6 million, but by the standards of that time, it was like 6 million. You know what I mean? In other words, if you're living in that part of Germany and the whole Vienna gets wiped out, the Jewish community, and the women were put in Shibuya situations, terrible stuff, burned alive. So, you know, you have no choice but to recover the best you can. The current idea of PTSD, whatever they call it, the post-traumatic syndrome, and the depression, the Holocaust survivor syndrome, I'm sure you had something like that at that time. But counterbalancing it was the fact that life must go on. There's no state of Israel. There are no Jewish welfare institutions. You still had to put yourself back up by your bootstraps. You had no choice. And so your family was wiped out, but you're the survivor. You go weiter. That's what happened to our hero. His mother, I think his father was dead, but his mother, his uncles, they all burned alive. And what's interesting to me, Al Kiddush Hashem. What's interesting to me always is, because I find him fascinating as a person, the Trumas edition. He, didn't get crushed by it, but he didn't hide from it. And his students say, this is interesting. On Tisha B'Av afternoon, after the keynotes, he would gather the students together and he would tell over about the death of his parents and the Holocaust of 1422. He was over the Parsha. Again, they did Al Kiddush Hashem, so it was a religious kind of thing. On the other hand, this is how he dealt with his own personal Holocaust memories, which I think is very normal because you don't talk about it all the time, but you don't hide from it and pretend it didn't happen either. One day a year on Tisha B'Av, which is actually the time to do it, that's when he went and put himself into it. After that, he eventually was in Marburg, as I said before. I was once offered to go there for a tour. Who the heck wants to go to Slovenia just to see 5 minutes here? Now, the shul is there, and the shul was built in the 1200s. And so you can see where our hero was rabbi for X number of years. You can see where it was a synagogue and even the yeshiva building and all the rest of it, that fortified situation, and eventually moved to Vienna Neustadt. So here, as in classic form, he spent the rest of his life. He was the Rav of the Kehillah, the Av Basin. That's number one. And number two, in the old famous Av Basin style, he attracted his own personal yeshiva of many guys from all over Europe. So it became a hot item. And if you were a Talmud of Trumas Hadeshin, that was like today being, I don't know, Talmud most prestigious business. Yisrael Isserline. His students emerged as being very devoted to him. He had a Mosheich personality. He had a personality that his students admired, and he lived a crystal life. Now, I'll tell you what I mean when I say that. But before I do that, so here's somebody who lived, from the 1420s and 1460s. First in A and then in B. I mean, like I said before, you don't know where Marburg is, which is a Marburg. And you don't know where Wiener Neustadt is. But their cities already, let's say in the Austria-Slovenia area. And he built it up into something. Now, this was the time, as I said before, when the Ashkenaz Jews had been hit over the head by a 2x4. You had all these pogroms. You had these persecutions. They were continuing. Every once in a while, a Catholic preacher would come in. What should I say? Who am I thinking of? Who's that guy? Sharpton, Al Sharpton. They had Al Sharpton type guys show up. And to be perfectly honest, Al Sharpton's not as bad as these guys were. They would always make speeches, and by the time it's over, kill all the Jews. Sometimes they were criticized for this, sometimes for money lending, sometimes for blood libel, sometimes for host desecration. They stabbed the wafer, and the wafer, being Jesus' body, started bleeding. All these kind of businesses. And by the time it's over, lo roizeh ki roizeh, kavanos al hazeh v'derech lahazeh. The Jews get killed out. So it was a tough time. By the way, there is a story. I forget where it is. I mean, it's in Trumas Suggestion or in the Leka Yoshos, you'll see. Some preacher came in like a Al Sharpton type and started carrying on against the Jews, and God hates them, and the Jews are this and the other. And the Trumas Suggestion himself, whenever he says, "Oh, really? I say you're a liar." And guess what? Let's take a test. You say you're telling the truth about Jews. I say you're a liar. You're a damn liar. Now let's walk both of us on hot coals with bare feet. Let's see what happens. You such a Christian, you believe you're right, and I'm such a terrible person, so I should get burned up and you should get through, like Abraham through the fiery furnace. And the preacher, the Catholic guy said, no, no thank you, right? So no, they exposed him as a phony. That's the type of guy he was. He said, I'll walk with you right now through the fire. Meaning, Thomas Nabshin Plishtim. He was willing to take that mamzer down just to save the Jewish community. That's what he was, because they both get burned. So he's an interesting person. Now, as a Rav, what's interesting is like this. As a rabbi, he became famous for halacha l'maisa. First of all, he had many students, and a lot of them became rabbis themselves. But totally separate from that, the German Jewry was in a terrible state after all these pogroms, the Black Death, the plagues, the medical, the anti-Semitic. And one of the things that happened was to end all the plagues and pogroms of the 1300s, a lot of Jews got killed, and you didn't have any Talmidei Chacham running around anymore. And so when you don't have Talmidei Chacham running around anymore, you still have rabbis, because communities need people to run the show. And so what I'm trying to say is you have a very bad quality of people who are officially Rabbanim. It's the best you can do. We've had this from time to time in America. I won't go into detail. And so the bottom line is the rabbi more or less an Amoritz. The Beis Din is more or less Amoratzim, more or less. They're the best you could get. And so in that time, there were like a few Moshe Feinsteins running around across Germany, 2 or 3, like the Maril, the Mariwell, and our hero. And these are the ones that everybody had to turn to actually know something. One of his students, who later on writes a book called Eka Yosher, he said, I learned 5 years by Trumas Hadesh, by my Rebbe. Then I went and learned in the Rhineland, in other yeshivas. They asked me a million questions about him. Halacha, did he really say this? And did he paskin this way and that way? I said, yeah. Why? I said, I don't know. I'm not the biggest Talmid Chacham. Later on, I went back to what do you call it? To my Rebbe. As I went back to Austria, and I brought back a list of 1 second here. Just want to fix something. Yeah. I went back to my Rebbe with a list of questions, and the question was like this: why did you paskin this in Hilchos Shabbos? Why did you paskin that way in Hilchos Kashrus? Why did you paskin this way in Hilchos this, that, and the other? And each time he said to me like this: why? I paskin it? It's a Befeish Gemara. This is a Tosfos, right? This is a Marmanberg. This is Befeish and the Rush. In other words, he said, I saw what big Amrasim they were back there. They simply didn't know. Now, it's not to knock them. It's knocking them, of course. Not to knock them. This was the situation in the early 1400s, and the 1400s Bechlal, in many places in Germany. The 3 heroes, the Maril, and Rabbi Yaakov Weil, and Trumas Hadeshin, went on to labor to try to build things back up. The only possible way you can do so, and that is to create yeshivas and try to turn out Talmidim, some of whom will be of the level that they'll be serious scholars, and they'll be able to pass the shalas in a real way in the future. This is the story of German Jewry, Ashkenaz Jewry, in the 15th century. That's what it is. And I think of all of them, our hero had the biggest yeshiva, and probably most students. He's not the only one, but I would say he's the main one. And he was viewed this way around the world. So people knew at that time, you want a big Ashkenazi rabbi who actually knows something, even if you're living in Sephardi land, even if you're living in Italy. By the way, he was a little bit of a time in Italy. It's interesting business. When the pogroms came, the Holocaust of 1422, if I remember correctly, he had to flee. Where did he go? He goes south into Italy. I told you more than once, the Italian Jews, rove of them, were not Italian Jews. It's exactly what I'm talking about now. That there were killings going on in Germany, and as a result, a bunch of Ashkenazi, Yiddish-speaking Jews like him ran away to Italy, and in his case, he didn't stay there, went back. In a lot of cases, he just stayed there. So you're talking about northern Italy, the communities, Verona, Padua, places like that, were chashuva communities of Italian Jewry. They're actually Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi Jews. And if anything, their style affected the Italian Jewish learning. I don't want to get you too detailed over here. The Marik, who I spoke about before, actually used to learn one way. Then when he met a Talmud of Trumas Hadeshin, who was dying in Italy, he flipped to the Trumas Hadeshin's way of learning, because our hero is going to be pretty famous for what we call Savari Yashara, straight, normal, argumentation. But how do I know? This is where literary legacies come into play, because our hero realized in the course of his career what the situation like his course in Germany, and that was the largest community. I'm talking about Germany from top to bottom. It's a huge area, the Holy Roman Empire. And he realized there's a lot of unclarity out there. And so he undertook to publish in his lifetime a collection of halachic questions, which he called the Trumas Hadeshin. From the Chumash, the Trumas Hadeshin, you take away the ashes, right? The Hayri Mitzadeshin. Asher Techala Ishes Olal Mizbech. B'Sal Meitz Mizbech. You say it every morning, I assume, right? Maybe you say the Karbonis. So Deshin is Shindan Dalet. That's 354. That's how many days there are in the Hebrew year. And so it gives you the impression every day you do one shiloh. Believe you me, you could do a lot worse than that. I'm a big fan of the Trumas edition, and as you'll see, and if I was talking to Rabbi Wall, I went over his house in Teaneck, if it ever comes out that I do another podcast, because he was urging me to do one just on Shalos and Shuvas, from a historical point of view, which is an idea I'm thinking about. Maybe I can find a sponsor. I don't know. I would do a lot from Trumas edition, at least at the beginning, because his questions are always extremely fascinating. The point I'm getting at is he published a sefer, which he edited. Now, this is unusual. And it's got one shiloh per day, 354. And they don't have, it's not, and how should I put this? It's written in a little bit different style, a better style than the regular Shalos and Shuvas. The regular Shalos and Shuvas were literally the guy's letters. Rashi, Rajba, people like that. People wrote him letters, and he wrote back. And the normal style in Shalos and Shuvas is chapla. If you're familiar at all, for example, with the Igros Moshe, what's the most maddening part of the Igros Moshe? You don't know, because the scholar Moshe Feinstein and everybody is, you wrote me a question about Hilchos Shabbos, but in the second or third or fourth paragraph, there's a completely different question about a get, or about a lady who went nuts, or about a kashrus question, or homosexuality. With the Ramesh, you don't know. So unless you have a index or something like that, nowadays internet, you can fix that. Everybody knows this. So it's not enough to know, that this is a question of Shabbos. So I'll look it up in Orach Chaim. It's either got to be Orach Chaim 9, Orach Chaim 2, Orach Chaim 3, Orach Chaim 4. Not necessarily. You can have a Shabbos question that Ramesh can throw in the end of something in Even Ezer. That is the style, because in the real world, let's say I was a rabbi, and let's say I was writing a question Moshe Feinstein. I'm just making it up, obviously. And let's say I was living in 1970. And I'm a rabbi in, Schenectady, wherever, it doesn't matter, Seattle. And I have in my shul 3 problems. One, I have a Gittin problem. Another one, I have a Nida problem. And the third one, I don't know, you have a Shechita problem. And so here I am, and I don't know what the answer is. So I'm writing a formal shiloh to Moshe Feinstein in New York. And let's say he's nice enough to write me back. So I get an answer with all these different questions. Now, when he publishes it in a sefer, he's going to decide, or his editors decide. I mean, Moshe, when he was alive and well, he did his own editing, I think. So he said, we're going to call this a Git. We'll put this under Gittin, because the main question was about the get. But at the end, there's also other stuff. And so, unless you're just skilled at using the indices and things like that, you don't even know it's there. Okay? You're not going to know it's there. This is the normal way, because what I just described is real life. Me, myself, and I today. I could have some shiloh or a set of shilohs. And let's say I was writing, I don't know who's around today, some big guy here in Israel. I'll write 3 separate questions, because I have 3 separate questions. If that guy, this big guddle, decides to put it in some sefer he's going to publish, he might put it here, might put it here, might here. It's fine if you have these apparatuses and things like that. But in the Middle Ages, there were no books. Everything was just copied. And so unless somebody's a real Talmud Chacham and has gone through Shas and a lot of posting and things like that, you're not going to be able to find anything in there. So out of a sense of public welfare, our hero, he took the trouble to edit clearly and nicely the 354 questions. And each one is kind of short in the sense that it only deals with one problem. So maybe in real life, he got 5 shilas from somebody, but by the time he puts it in his book, the question about Gittin is going to go in the section about Gittin. Totally separate from that, the question about kashrus is going to go in the section about kashrus. And totally separate from that, the question about Shabbos or Eruvin is going to go in that section. So in other words, he did a very good job of editing, which is kind of unknown in Jewish history. If you ask me who's famous for editing in the rabbinic world of the Middle Ages, I can only think of the Rambam and the Trumas Hadeshin. It's pretty sad, right? And the Rambam and the Trumas Hadeshin. Now, because of this, people in later centuries, like the Shach, the Taz, said it's a davar yedua that the Trumas Hadeshin is made up. No, he didn't actually get these shilas. You can look in the Shach, in Choshen Mishpat, I think, the Taz, and it became a well-known legend. It's also in the Chidah and the Shem HaGadol. The Trumas Hadeshin is a made-up thing, is artificial. In other words, it's not really got that shilah. He just wanted to discuss this matter, and so he wrote it in a way as if somebody sent him the shilah. It's actually not true at all. And modern scholars, I would say starting around 1890, I'm talking about from people, went into this be'in, those who care about this. I'm just sharing with you because it's a little bit interesting. And if you will read about Trumas Hadeshin, you'll often read the false legend that's like made up stuff. And I won't skip you with all the details. As Professor Dinari wrote a whole dissertation on this as part of his book. It's a very good book. And in front of me, I have some books here about the 15th century. Yeah, here it is. Chachmei Ashkenaz. Here it is. Chachmei Ashkenaz. B'shel Yimei HaBinayim. And he has a whole chapter on going in Bracha Bichak Tana, comparing the manuscripts and the different editions. And not only him, Freiman and other people talked about it, for Berliner. And it's not true. And I can tell anyway. Anybody who reads the Trumas Hadeshin, you can tell these are real questions. Maybe they're artfully edited in a nice way to get rid of the problem of the Igros Moshe I said before, that everything is kaplop all over the place. But the questions really happen. And the reason I mention this is because he was a posek ador. He got questioned from everybody. And he chose, to put him in this format. Now, I don't know what basis he decided these, because I can guarantee you, a guy like him has thousands of shilas. I'm serious. I'm not exaggerating. The Trumas Hadeshin was, I'm sure every day letters came from who knows where, because he had that kind of authority. He obviously made a selection, because we only have 354 out of several thousand. That tells you something. In addition to that, there's another 267 called Psakim Uksavim, where there it's more like you see the person he's writing to. But even these two put together are only a small chelik of his actual output. But because, in my opinion, he took the trouble to actually edit this, it became classics in rabbinic literature. And everybody knows the Trumas Hadeshin is heavy stuff. And all the great Achronim, started with the Marshal and the others, they say, and the Sfardim also. It's a Trumas Hadeshin? That counts. And anybody slightly familiar, even slightly familiar with the Shulchan Aruch knows Rabbi Yosef Karo uses him, and the Ramah uses him all the time, right? It's the Maharoi, right? Marina Rabbi line. So he's everywhere, okay? So his influence was enormous because he took the trouble to edit well. That means he left out a lot of stuff, but the stuff he had was like Solas Nikia. Now, in the Trumas Hadeshin, and in his writings, he came across as this huge posek, but that's not his only identity. Even if that was his only identity, that would be enough. As I said before, if somebody wanted to do an essay, a podcast, or anything like this, or an interesting and famous Shalos and Shuvas, historically grounded, you can just, the Trumas Hadeshin will keep you busy for a year. I'm not exaggerating. And they're never very long, but they're pithy. And he was Ashkenaz posek in the 1400s. So notice, first of all, you go by the Gemara, but also, obviously, you go by the Ashkenazi Gedolim. So to him, the Rush, oh my goodness, the Rush, much more than the Rambam. He's always into the Rush. And There goes Maimon, Mordechai, those kind of things. Or is it raw? This is when Ashkenazi was a living tradition of the German variety. But he doesn't simply go like them. He's always very sweary sharp, and you never know where he's going to go. That's what I always like about the Trumas edition. You never know where he's going to go. Sometimes he's machmir, sometimes he's mekel. Always with tremendous common sense, and also a great sense of piety. In a good way. Great sense of piety in a good way. So the Trumas edition is replete with all kind of interesting questions. In addition to that, he was a Rosh Hashiva. Now, he's a Rosh Hashiva in the old school, the Av Bezdin type. And what do I mean by that? These guys, Mount Rottenberg was like that. I'll use modern terminology. They lived in the dorm room. It's not exactly the way it was, but this is what it would boil down to if I use modern terminology. They lived with their whole family in the dorm room, in the dorm. And their life was exposed constantly to the public. And even the most intimate, it's a shocking, even the most intimate details was a public display. And I can only conclude, first of all, the guy was a loose goose. He had no issues of gaiva whatsoever, which is true. This is the old German. Usually they care about titles. He was called up to the Torah Yisrael Memsachia. Yamod Yisrael Memsachia. Not Marina Rav, not Rosh Hashiva, not Hagon, anything like that. Just Yamod Yisrael Memsachia. That's one thing. Second of all, if you read his writings, he always says, I know you insulted me, and if I wanted to, I could bust you. I'm going to let it go because it's the right thing. You think I'm kidding? Where did I put it? He's got these things over here. He said, I know you said bad things about me, and I could get you back, but Hanelam, and so on and so forth. I don't know where it is. I have to take time to flip it around. He's great. Now, the reason I say this is because, aside from his very, very interesting shilos, and I get all different types, and I'll read you a few in a minute. You'll see what I mean. Just the interesting types, aside from the regular Dal Chalke Shulchan Aruch type stuff. After he died, I think it was, around that time, one of his students, I wouldn't say the smartest of his students, but the guy was a Talmud, as I mentioned before, Yosef Estreicher, Yosef of Austria, put together for his fans a book called Leket Yosher. So if you want anything about the Trumas edition, if this is a subject that interests you, if it doesn't, do what you want. If it's a subject that interests you, and I think it's very interesting, you have 3 books, A, B, and C. Trumas edition, Pesakim Ukesavim, which is usually always published in the Trumas edition, and then Leket Yosher. Okay? Now, Leket Yosher is from the student. That guy followed him around like Rav Kahana and the Gemara. Remember Kahana Puk? What are you watching? He was watching them. The students are watching him 24/7. Even the intimate marital life, it's unbelievable. So obviously he had no issues with this. This is Torah V'Luminati Sarach, and he said, I want to tell me to learn everything and whatever. And he was held in such high esteem. Now, that's why when you read the Leket Yosher, you get all these wonderful, wonderful things. Okay? He says, I wrote these things down when I was there. The hero worship is extraordinary because he watches them from the morning when he gets up and goes to the bathroom. But also, you wouldn't know this from the Trumas edition, he was a Maggid Shir. He had a Shir. This is the old days of the 1400s, in which you had the Rosh Hashiva, the Rav, the Bezdin gave like 3 shirs a day, I think. Or over the course of the week, several days, he gave 3 shirim a day. One's a Bekiah shir, one's a Ian shir, like Sugyas, and one's a Pilpul shir, right? Near Mafalpo. In which, and we talked about this in the past, This is when you do Rashi versus Tosa Rashi. How come Rashi didn't know what Tosa was saying? He must have really. Tosa knew what Rashi was saying. He must have really. You tear it apart to little bits. Although he says you don't make a brichas at Torah on the pilpul. that's in the Leket Yosha. The reason I mention it is because he has a wonderful story. I consider this a wonderful story. Pa'amachas baboker lovash chaluko shaloka darko v'avach apnim milchutz v'omer bitoch seged halocha lebochrim v'losho shapir. I could just see it. He woke up he went in the morning to give a shiur. His head was totally vertracht. He wasn't thinking about anything. He put on his jacket backwards, right? He walked into the shiur. He started talking. You see everybody smirking, Then he realized that his jacket was on backwards. They had the losho shopper, had to take it off. That's a real Rashiva from old, like you hear about in the stories. He was totally out of it, you see? Because for that morning, he's concentrating on the shiur. But that's nothing. Listen to this. The Shachris Miyake Shiyotza Beis Akise, the guy walks him waking up in the morning and going to the bathroom. The Rosh Hashiva. The Shachris Miyake Shiyotza Beis Akise, Rachas Yodo, B'Shavach. He watches the whole ceremony. Rachas Yodo, B'Shavach al Smol Gimel Pamin, 3 times. Wait a minute, let me get it. B'Shachris Kishiyotza Beis Akise, Rachas Yodo, B'Shavach al Yodo Yamino Gimel Pamin, B'Nosan Beged al Yad Yamino. After he washes 3 times on the right, then he takes a beged to hold, the cup. V'nota kli b'yamino b'shav al smero gimel pamim. V'yakar kach notal mayim al shtei yodav. V'moshen yachid, mix them together. V'achar kach lokach mayim in a kli below beged. In other words, he even washed when he held the cup he washed with the beged, and then when at what point he takes it off. V'shav mayim al yodav. V'mar yodav al einav. And he put the water over his eyes, as they say. At that point, he blew his nose. See, he was held in such veneration. Every little nakuda that he did, they were benoto matmai bioto benosa b'piv, and then go like this and swoosh around with his mouth. Okay. And sometimes he didn't do it with his hand into his mouth. He poured from the kli into his mouth. Like this, Misham Kmitza, Mason Kmitza, Hayamin Befiv Lesad Smolo, and he would put his ring finger, the Kmitza, on the right hand in his mouth. Besad Smolo, so he washed his, to use modern terminology, he brushed his teeth with his hand. I mean, we're talking the 15th century. Look what he's writing over here. And he would brush his teeth with his finger that way. That's why with the right ring finger, you put it on the left-hand side of your mouth. He says a Kabbalistic reason. You heard from a famous Gadol. There's a Kabbalistic reason. That's how you should do it. But Tim said, and then he would wash his ears. He put some water on his hands, and he would stick his fingers to clean at his ears. I always noticed he wasn't machbid dafka to put the ring finger, sometimes put the pinky. They say the zeres. But the daughter of a famous doctor in the town told me, not true. He always washed his ears with his ring finger. Look at the unbelievable detail over here. And only then did he make Netilas Yadayim. And here's another one. He used it as a toothpick after he ate cheese, because he cleaned the cheese. A feather of a bird. I'm not saying this is recommended by the medical association, but this is the 15th century. Why? He told me once they didn't want to use something metal because it could hurt the teeth. Again, we're talking like levels of, like what you and I would say, like this is nobody's business, right? But no, the Ramaiman, in other words, you held like the Rambam, Shabolo Chalom al I remember he was big into dreams, and there was another Gadol of David Schweinitz, and he said, I had a dream about you, and it was something bad, and therefore we should both fast. We should both fast. The dream was B'yom Vav Hochel Merchatz. Right, they went to the bathhouse on Friday. Merchatz Ba Machlokes Ben Shnayim, and I saw you got into a fight in the dream with another guy in the bathhouse. Bishul Klishi Ish B'Mayim Shekar Kavo. I guess the question was they're both fighting over who should get the cup which you pour water in the sauna or whatever. And the fight ended in such a situation. The guy threw the cup at you and hit you in the eye and ruined your vision. All this is a dream. And therefore he said, and he gets more and more dreams and so on and such and so forth, right? And he was mocking this. And here's the thing about Purim, when they deal with the Shalchmanas, usually he would always say thank you, but when he gets to Shalchman, he don't say thank you. Mandantnit on Purim, you don't say thank you on Purim. And so on and so on and such and such. And when I say it's a drop of bucket, it's not even a drop in bucket. There's 1,000 of these, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 of these little things, maybe more, in the Leki Yosher. And he himself said it was only incomplete. Recently, they republished it, but to tell you the truth, I say only one, the blue volume, like the Machli Yerushalayim. I have it somewhere. I'm just not going to bother to do it. The classic one, which is just fine, is the Golden Oldie from Professor Fryman, right? Leki Yosher over here, right? Which always comes together with the Noah Kitson Yosef and the other thing. If you're into this sort of thing, and on the last page, see I highlighted last page. This is just wonderful. He said, now the guy who wrote this was a Talmud Chacham, but he was he was a class B or C Talmud Chacham. I asked him once, Zokin shekamoscha ma hano yesh lecha b'Mashiach. This is just wonderful. What do you need the Mashiach for? You're sitting and learning your whole life. Right? The Rambam will say you want Mashiach, so you can sit and learn your whole life. You're holding by big ruchnias. You're a Makubal already. In the month of El, he writes in Leki Yosher. Since we're in Rosh Chodesh El today, I think this is all fascinating. El, so first of all, he will lock himself in a room for an hour. It says and study Kabbalah. He won't let anybody else in. So Kabbalah he learned during Elul. That's number one. Number two, he down for the Amid because he had a very good voice. These are all Shachris the whole month of Elul. Number three, he loved to spend an hour on Baruch Shamar. Elul. Baruch Shamar v'Hayolom Baruch Baruch Omer v'Oisa Baruch Gozer Mekayim. He was singing in ecstasy an hour. So I want to tell you something right now. If you were in his yeshiva or his community, you saw him do like every hour, that's probably better than a Musar Shemuz, right? They spend an hour in Baruch Shamar. But anyway, so a guy like you, what do you need Mashiach time? I mean, you're already holding there. And he said, very piously, Heshavli, Miyitin she'era Mashiach rachatzi shog v'yakach hamas. He said, I just want to live this new Mashiach even 30 minutes, and then I'm ready to die. And the guy writes this, lucky I says, I kicked myself. I didn't ask him, what does he mean by that? Okay? So it's a wonderful safety like a Yosher. Besides, it has many halachic tshubas and all the rest of it. But you get these kind of insights into the personal life of the guy and all the rest of it. They don't get anywhere. And you see, it's a real hero worship in the best sense of the word. Torah v'luman, like Rabbi Khan, like I said before, I'm not going to go on a podcast into the intimate marital stuff, but it's X-rated, It's unbelievable what they have. And these Svarmka people say like this. The Trumas Hadeshin with the Trumas Hadeshin. He was a big deal. And everything he did was Kodesh Kodashim. And that's the Roshim he left in a generation. This you don't find usually. We have these records by others. I'm not saying the others were not like that. But the Trumas Hadeshin, we have a very strong memory factor that you see reflected in the literature, that the students were nuts over him. And obviously, he was just not just a good old, but he was an attractive personality. You understand? Attractive personality. He himself was very frum. They would call him a chassid. He had a lot of personal chumras, but he didn't tell someone else to do it. That's the old way, right? You can do it. You don't tell someone else to do it. Nor did he tell his wife to do it. So that's what they write over here. So I don't know. As I said before, he's always a very remarkable personality. In the Trumas edition, you have endless fascinating questions. The 190s are always very interesting from the history perspective. Not from the history perspective. As I said before, just a very brief example. Here's the famous case. I just did an article they published in the RJJ journal, but I wrote it like 12, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, whatever. They didn't take it that time. Now they did it, and they re-edited it. So I think they left this out. Otherwise, I would tell you to look in there. Because I remember putting in stuff from the Trumas edition. But I think they edited it out now. And it's very interesting because first of all, he lived in hard times. So questions about Yeharg Valyavar were questions, correct? There were cases where Jews, individual and communities, found themselves in Yeharg Valyavar situations, or not. So can you dress like a guy to save your life? Can you bow down? This is the interesting part. I'll read you the translation. It's easier. This is a priest or a nobleman who wears a cross. So here you are in Austria in the 1400s. You have to bow down to the king. You have to bow down to the duke. But these guys are Christians, so they're wearing big crosses and all the rest of it. Is that considered mishtachel avodah zarah? Is it shesi ve'erev? Is it a cross? Is that avodah zarah? Is a Jew permitted to raise his hat to him or bow down in respect? And of course, he says naturally, if you can somehow avoid it, but often you can't avoid it. And he says, when I was a kid in Vienna, there was a big dignitary of the church, there was a big bishop or whatever, who was a friend of the Jews. What's shot a friend of the Jews? He would cover the cross when he met a Jew, had to bow to him. So basically, the guy was a nice guy. And so let's say, for example, he was wearing, his shirt had a big cross on it. When he would see a rabbi or something coming, he'd put a coat over it, right? A cloak. So the rabbi would be able to bow to him in respect without bowing to the cross. He was a nice guy, okay? But you can't always count on that. That was unusual, okay? And he quotes Rabbi Yitzhak Oppenheim, who says you can bow down because you're bowing down not to the cross, but to the person. I'm just trying to show you that these are real life questions, okay? Can a guy pretend to be a Christian in 197 by wearing Gentile garbs, where he says you can? That's the article I was writing. Can you listen to the Mishnah Madriapi? Can, as long as you don't say you're a Christian, can you look like you're one in order to avoid being killed or beaten up? Okay. Then you have the case of the apostate Jew converted, which a lot of, and then this guy wants to come back. And, they used to have all these harsh ceremonies of re-entry into Judaism. I don't know if you know about that. And the Trumas edition says, don't do it. The guy will get so turned off and go back to Christian. Now, you got to go psychologically. You know what I'm saying? The guy, if he made the decision, once he switched to the other side, to come back to Jewish, and he knows how hard it is to be Jewish, meaning he's subject to persecution, all the rest of it, let's go easy on him. Which is which is very interesting. And, when do you commit martyrdom? He has a famous question, which is very often discussed. In a situation where the din is Yavar Val Yeharg. Suppose I want to do Yeharg Val Yavar, which is a machlokes the Rambam and Tosafos, actually many people are familiar with. And the Rambam says that in a situation where it's not one of the big three, for example, let's say a guy says, for economic reasons, eat this ham sandwich or I'll kill you. So you can eat the ham sandwich. But if the Jew says, no, I want to die. The Rambam says that's an Avera. Tosafos says it's a mitzvah. And so that's one of the questions that he deals with. many similar sorts of things. I'm just trying to say that whereas a lot of the Trumas edition obviously is straightforward halacha stuff, a lot of it is historically very interesting, and to read any one of them is just a fascinating exercise. It's a fascinating exercise, and he comes across a person who made just a tremendous rosham, as he said before, on his generation. The I myself, and by the way, in halacha, I mean, now's not the time to go into this. Trumas is a major player in halacha. He revolutionized the ribbis business. I don't know if you know that. The heteriscus. Before him, it was one way. And after him, it's another way. The way they have the heteriscus now is like a joke, meaning there's no risk being taken by the guy lending the money. By the time they structure and restructure it all, and as far as I'm aware, that starts with him. And he says, I know it looks like a joke and all the rest of it, but we worked it out. Is halachically, acceptable. And in these times, it's necessary. Right? I remember he said, I know it looks funny, but it doesn't matter. We can do it. And he had the authority to push it through. So if you're into a ribbis or something like that type of guy, I mean, Trumas edition is of great interest. But in every area of halacha, when I was young, they used to have the old Trumas editions. And I got it when I was young. Especially, I found out that I don't know exactly how, but I'm kind of related to him. There's this lady in Ohio who made a family tree of my mother's thing and worked back to the Trumas edition and others. Wasn't able to follow it up, but she did the homework. And then, of course, they came out with the cottage industry. About 30 years ago. Is that what it is? 1991, 30 years ago, exactly. The regular Trumas edition with the footnotes. This is all you really need, right? Because this gives you the footnotes and all that stuff. You know what I mean? If it's brought down to the Ramah or one of those type of things, or if there's some famous I don't know the Yehuda or something like that talks about it. For some reason, in recent times, this is the one I love. There's I call it a pocket size Trumas edition. It's not exactly pocket size, but for work of this type, and the print was so nice. And I've just become very fond of this. Once in a while, I'll just open it to read something in Trumas edition. It's not easy, his stuff, but nevertheless, it's always interesting, And this has the Trumas edition plus the supplements of it. And then recently, not long ago, they came out with like a deluxe scholarly edition, 2 volumes over here. Machon Chachma Shlomo, I don't know who that is. And they have the footnotes de la Bomba. So I bought them all because if I'm ever interested in Trumas edition, this one is where they did like heavy duty research, which is great because it's a Mayan Lo Atzav. Trumas edition, I've never seen it boring, and you can't say about every sefer. Look, not everybody's a genius for everything. If I was a super genius, I would find everything interesting. But Trumas edition is always very interesting. And you see that he's a perfect example of those who are ancestors who said like this, listen, a Holocaust happened, get over it. I don't mean get over it, forget it, but life has to move on. And we have to simply rebuild. This was like the punishment of after the Second World War. People like that. You have no choice. We live in times when people talk about the Holocaust and this and that. That's true. And if anything, the younger generation are forgetting it, so that's not good either. But at the end of the day, you have to have like a constructive plan. And we all know the only thing that has worked before is, yeshivas and things like that. And Trumas edition, to my mind, is an outstanding example of this phenomenon. Within a few years after he died in 1460, Jews were expelled from that area, and the same junk has happened all over throughout the Middle Ages. But once his book was out, and his book was one of the first Hebrew books published, which was in 1519. Before they printed the Gemara, Bromberg, before he printed the Gemara, he printed the Trumas edition, which is really interesting. It shows it was a hot item and people wanted copies of it, which doesn't surprise me because I said before, it is well edited, and you don't find usually until the 20th century, 19th, 20th century, or no to be, I shouldn't say 19th, You don't find too often people take great efforts to properly edit the Shalas and Chuvas. That's what makes the Yehuda well, and the others. The editing is a lot. Uh, anyway, I see the time is up, and I don't want to overdo it. So with that, I wish you a good week.